Stalingrad, late 1942. A soldier crawls through a collapsed factory corridor so narrow he cannot raise his rifle to his shoulder. Something is moving 8 feet ahead in the dark. He does not have room to aim. He does not have time to reload. What he has strapped across his pack is a small folding spade, the same tool he used that morning to dig a firing position into frozen ground. He does not remember deciding to use it. He remembers the weight of the handle in his palm, and then it was over. Soldiers on both sides of the Eastern Front wrote about this same moment in different words for 4 years. The rifle was not always the weapon that mattered. Sometimes the tool a man carried to dig his own grave in advance was the only thing close enough to reach for. This is the story of how a piece of digging equipment became one of the most feared close-quarters weapons of the 20th century, and why, decades later, Soviet special forces trained with it as seriously as they trained with a knife or a pistol. The tool itself has a name most people have never heard. The Malaya Pekhotnaya Lopata, which translates roughly as small infantry spade, its origin is not Soviet at all. It goes back to 1869, when General Alexei Kuropatkin, then a young officer in the Imperial Russian Army, argued that soldiers needed a compact digging tool they could carry into the field without slowing down an advance. The design that resulted was almost absurdly simple: a steel blade roughly 6 inches across, riveted to a wooden handle about 2 feet long, light enough that a soldier barely noticed it on his belt. Nobody in 1869 was thinking about combat use. The spade was for trenches, for cover, for the unglamorous daily labour of an army that spent most of a war underground rather than charging across open fields. It stayed that way, largely, through the Russo-Japanese War, through the First World War, and into the opening years of the Second. What changed was the kind of fighting Soviet soldiers found themselves doing. By 1942, entire sectors of the Eastern Front had stopped resembling open battle and started resembling something closer to building strangulation. Stalingrad is the example everyone remembers, but the same conditions repeated across dozens of Soviet cities: collapsed apartment blocks, factory floors turned into kill zones, basements and stairwells where 2 men might round a corner and find themselves closer to each other than either one expected. A rifle with a fixed bayonet is close to 5 feet long. In a stairwell, in a collapsed room, in a trench too narrow to turn around in, 5 feet of length is not an advantage. It is a liability. Soldiers started sharpening the edges of their entrenching tools. Not officially, not by any published order that survives in Soviet military archives, but by habit, the same way soldiers in every army improvise the tools they already carry into something sharper than intended. A blade that could bite into frozen earth could, with a few minutes of work on a whetstone, bite into far softer material. And unlike a rifle, it never jammed, never needed a cartridge, and could be swung in a space too tight to properly extend an arm. Post-war Soviet accounts describe hand-to-hand fighting in the ruins of Stalingrad, where entrenching tools were preferred over bayonets, specifically because of their weight distribution. A rifle and bayonet is long and blade forward, built for a lunge. A sharpened spade is short and head-heavy, built for a full swing, closer to a hatchet than a sword. In a space where you cannot lunge, something built to swing wins. This is where the story would normally end. A wartime improvisation, forgotten once the war did. Except it was not forgotten. It was formalized. When the Soviet military modernized its infantry equipment after the war, the small spade was redesigned into the MPL-50, a folding version with a locking hinge that let the blade sit at 90 degrees to the handle for digging or fold flat for carrying. Standard infantry issue, millions produced. Nothing unusual about that on its own. Plenty of armies issue folding shovels. What was unusual was what Soviet special forces did with it next. According to Viktor Suvorov, the GRU officer who defected to Britain in 1978 and later published detailed accounts of Spetsnaz training, the entrenching tool was treated by Soviet special forces instructors as a genuine combat weapon, not a backup option. Suvorov described training exercises where soldiers were taught to throw the sharpened spade at a target the way another army might train knife throwing, and he claimed trained soldiers could hit a man-sized target at a distance of roughly 25 feet with consistent accuracy, using either the flat of the blade or the honed edge, depending on the The balance point is the reason this works at all. Unlike a knife, which most people struggle to throw accurately without extensive practice, because the blade and handle weight are close to even, The MPL-50 is deliberately head-heavy. That imbalance, which makes it slightly awkward to swing for digging, is exactly what gives it a stable, predictable rotation in flight. Spetsnaz Doctrine reportedly built an entire throwing technique around exploiting that imbalance, closer in principle to a tomahawk throw than anything resembling knife fighting. Whether every claim in Suvorov's account reflects universal Spetsnaz training, or one instructor's specific curriculum that Suvorov happened to witness, is not something any declassified Soviet document has ever settled. His book remains, much like his account of the ballistic knife, the primary open-source description the West has ever had. Corroboration from other defectors exists, but it is thin and mostly second-hand. What is easier to verify is that the entrenching tool never disappeared from Soviet and later Russian Special Forces equipment lists, and that instructors have continued teaching close-quarters use of it, well past the point where its digging function alone would justify that level of attention. A tool this simple does not need combat training built around it, unless someone senior enough to write the curriculum believed the combat use was real. There is a reason this particular weapon resists the kind of myth inflation that surrounds something like a ballistic knife or a poisoned umbrella tip. It has no hidden mechanism. There is no secret spring, no chemical coating, nothing to reverse engineer or misrepresent for a magazine advertisement. It is a sharpened piece of steel on a stick, and its entire reputation rests on the ordinary, repeatable fact that a trained man swinging one in a confined space is extremely difficult to stop. That plainness is probably why Western intelligence assessments barely mention it, next to entire files built around exotic KGB gadgets. Nobody writes an urgent cable about a shovel. And that is precisely the gap Soviet doctrine seems to have identified early and exploited deliberately. A weapon so unremarkable that nobody on the other side thought to take it seriously until they were standing close enough to find out otherwise. Accounts from Soviet operations in Afghanistan during the 1980s occasionally mention entrenching tools used in close engagements inside compounds and tunnel systems, environments that, structurally, were not so different from the ruined stairwells of Stalingrad 4. Decades earlier, the tool had in effect come home to the exact kind of fighting it was quietly adapted for in the first place. Confined space, no room for a rifle, a tool everyone already carried turned into the only option available. None of this makes the entrenching tool superior to a rifle or a knife, or any purpose-built weapon in an open engagement at any real distance. Nobody in the Soviet military ever claimed that. The claim, consistently, was narrower and more interesting than that in the specific circumstance where distance collapses to almost nothing, where a soldier cannot raise a barrel or extend a blade, the tool that was never designed to be a weapon at all turns out to outperform the ones that were. A soldier who carries a rifle is armed for the battle he expects. A soldier who also carries a sharpened spade is armed for the moment the battle stops looking anything like what he expected. The corridor, the basement, the collapsed room where the fight is decided in less than a second, and there is no time to think about which weapon is supposed to be the serious one. That was always the quiet logic behind it. Not a better weapon, just the one still in his hand when everything else had already failed him.